my son stopped me from attending my husband's funeral. A week later, at the inheritance meeting, he brushed me aside, stating, "This table is for those who truly belong here. I just contacted my lawyer. It's truly a pleasure to have you here with us. Come along with me on this journey until the very end. And let me know the city you're tuning in from, so I can truly appreciate how far my story has reached." After 45 years of marriage, I stood outside St. Mary's Church, watching my husband's funeral through a window, feeling like a stranger in my own existence. Yet here I stood, clutching my black purse with trembling hands, tears streaming down my face as I watched Dean accept the condolences that should have been directed towards me. "You really shouldn't go in there, Mom." Their haunting echo remains in my mind, conveyed with a cold assurance that hit me like a palpable impact. That morning, my soul child blocked my path, keeping me from ascending the church steps. "You have no place here after all the pain you caused Dad and the struggles I faced with Harold." The accusation was completely absurd, so devoid of compassion that I was left speechless in trying to defend my stance. Harold and I navigated our trials as any couple would, but the bond we shared was profound and unwavering. We encountered obstacles side by side, celebrated our victories, and welcomed the journey of time as one. How could Dean transform our relationship into something so distressing? There he stood, an imposing figure at 6'2", dressed in a polished black suit that exuded affluence and authority. Next to him was Cheryl, her well-known smirk firmly in place, unmistakably showing her pleasure in my unease. She leaned in, her voice soft and intimate, and he replied with a grave nod. "Dean, if you would be so kind, please," I begged, my voice quivering with deep feeling. He was the one who captured my heart completely. "I truly belong in that space. You gave up that right a long time ago," he replied, his eyes completely averted from mine. "Father revealed some truths to me, dear mother, regarding how you treated him when you thought no one was watching." I felt my legs beginning to tremble beneath me. Harold would never have spoken such words, as they were a complete departure from reality. Yet Dean seemed completely assured, filled with a profound sense of moral outrage. It dawned on me that Cheryl had been quietly shaping his thoughts for quite some time, possibly even years, planting seeds of doubt and resentment. With a sense of profound sorrow, I watched as faces I recognized filled the church neighbors who had been part of our lives for years, friends from our bridge club, and former colleagues from Harold's accounting firm. A few of them glanced my way, their faces a blend of confusion, as if they were pondering why I was not part of the cozy gathering within. People turned away, unable to withstand the heaviness of my embarrassment. Mrs. Patterson, from next door, started to walk toward me, her expression filled with concern, and the traces of age visible on her face. Yet, Cheryl stepped forward with poise, linking her arm with Mrs. Patterson's and guiding her into the church. Her gentle words shifted Mrs. Patterson's expression from confusion to a glimmer of understanding and empathy. As I stood on the sidewalk, an overwhelming sense of isolation wrapped around me, more intense than anything I had felt in my 73 years. The September breeze cut through my dark coat, urging me to pull it tighter around myself. The soothing notes of the organ drifted around us, reminiscent of the hymns that Harold and I had cherished together every Sunday for countless years. Through the colorful stained glass, I caught a glimpse of the ceremony that filled my heart with yearning. I glimpsed Dean at the podium, delivering what I can only envision was a deeply moving tribute to his father. People shared knowing looks and softly dabbed at their eyes with tissues. It seemed like a perfect send-off, one that Harold genuinely deserved. Yet, it was happening without me there to witness it. I thought back to the many nights I shared with Harold in his final days, holding his hand as he slipped in and out of uneasy slumber. I thought deeply about the medications I had carefully organized, the doctor's visits I had accompanied him to, and the efforts I had made to help him maintain his dignity, even as the illness slowly drained his vitality. None of that seemed to matter to Dean. From his viewpoint, I had taken on the role of the villain in this story. After what felt like a long, drawn-out moment, people began to emerge from the church. The pallbearers, Dean and 5 of Harold's dearest friends, carried the casket with a heavy heart to the waiting hearse. I leaned my back against the rugged bark of the tree, urging myself to merge with the shadows as the solemn funeral procession started to unfold. Dean settled into the front car next to Cheryl, assuming the position of chief mourner that should have been mine. As they walked by, Cheryl caught my eye through the window, her lips curving into the faintest suggestion of a smile. I decided against going to the cemetery. A deep wave of sorrow washed over me at the idea of being just an observer again, unable to bear the sight of Harold's final farewell as I remained distanced from his last moments. Instead, I returned to the tranquil home that held the lingering aroma of his aftershave and the soothing mint tea he cherished every evening. I settled into his beloved chair, allowing the flood of emotions to pour out until I was completely spent. Yet, amidst my sorrow, there was a flicker of something else within me, a subtle resolve that caught me off guard with its intensity. Dean believed he could wipe me from Harold's existence, reshaping our past to fit his own story. He believed he could bring me down, thinking I would just take it without a fight. He was mistaken. Harold had always approached life with a careful demeanor, meticulously considering each step he took. In the stillness of that vacant house, memories of his words from those last weeks began to surface, remarks that had seemed puzzling then, yet now appeared to weave together into a meaningful tapestry. "Believe me, Opal," he had murmured one evening when the suffering was especially intense, "I have ensured that you will be well looked after." Dean is not fully aware of everything. Back then, I thought he was merely offering me some reassurance regarding our financial situation. Yet, with a new wave of humiliation searing through me, I found myself questioning whether Harold had been aware of something beyond my understanding. Had he uncovered the truth behind Dean's mask? Could he have foreseen this act of treachery? Tomorrow, Dean was likely to gather everyone for a family meeting to talk about Harold's affairs. He would insist on managing every detail, much like he had dominated the arrangements for the funeral. Yet, for 45 years of marriage, Harold had been shrouded in secrets. Perhaps it was finally the moment for those hidden truths to be revealed. The phone rang precisely 7 days after the funeral, right when I was tending to Harold's beloved tomato plants in the garden. Dean's voice on the phone carried a professional detachment, lacking warmth. "We should get together to discuss Dad's estate. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock at the residence." "Absolutely," I responded, making an effort to maintain a calm tone. "I will be there. Please gather any financial documents you can obtain. We must ensure that everything is organized just right." The way he uttered the word "properly" sent a jolt through me, as if I had been navigating life all wrong, as if I required his approval to manage the household I had built with his father for more than 40 years. That evening, I found myself sifting through Harold's desk, collecting papers that seemed significant to me: bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to the house. These are the ordinary, yet essential documents that weave together the fabric of a life. My hands trembled just a bit as I carefully arranged everything into a folder. Harold's words lingered in my mind, echoing with a weight that was hard to shake off. Dean certainly has his limits. The following afternoon, I returned to what had once been my sanctuary, yet now it seemed strange and uninviting. Dean's sleek SUV sat prominently in the driveway, accompanied by Cheryl's vibrant red BMW and an unfamiliar vehicle that piqued my curiosity. I stepped inside, using my key, and called out gently, "Hello, I have arrived." In the dining room, Dean's voice returned, cutting and filled with urgency. I stepped into the dining room, a place where Harold and I had created countless memories over shared meals, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, and hosted festive holiday dinners. Now, it had become a space that resembled a courtroom rather than the warm heart of our home. Dean took his place at the head of the table, a quiet authority radiating from him as the others gathered around, each one sensing the weight of the moment. Harold's space, cluttered with documents, laid out as if he were a lawyer, meticulously organizing his argument. Cheryl settled into her seat beside him, impeccably polished as ever, her manicured fingers tapping softly against the rich mahogany surface. To Dean's left sat an unfamiliar man, middle-aged, with a briefcase resting beside his chair. "This is Robert Chen, the attorney representing your father," Dean stated directly. Without any introduction, he'll guide us through the intricacies of the will and estate planning process. I approached one of the vacant chairs, the very one that had been my seat for countless family dinners over the years. Just as I was about to take a seat, Dean's voice froze me in my tracks. "I'm sorry, but this gathering is intended solely for close family members." I stood motionless, my fingers lingering on the chair's back. "Excuse me, could you please repeat that?" Cheryl gazed at me with her icy blue eyes, a smirk of satisfaction playing on her lips. "This is intended for those who genuinely have an interest in Harold's estate." The words struck me with a jolt. I scanned the table, taking in the scattered papers, the solemn faces, and the way their gazes fixed on me, as if I were an unwelcome guest. "Harold was my husband," I murmured softly, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. Dean's jaw clenched with tension. "Indeed, you have caused him a great deal of suffering over the past decade. Did you really believe we were oblivious to your need to manage every detail? How did you manage to keep him away from his friends? How did you manage to make him feel guilty for wanting to be with his own son?" Every allegation pierced my heart, deepening the shadows that surrounded me. None of it was true, but the conviction in Dean's voice made me wonder if he actually believed these lies, or if this was all an elaborate performance. "Dean, that's not—" I started, but he cut me off. "This table is for people who have rights to something here. People Dad actually cared about." The cruelty in those words took my breath away. I stood there, clutching my folder of documents, feeling smaller and more insignificant than I ever had in my life. The man who had emerged from my body 38 years ago was telling me that his father hadn't cared about me. Mr. Chen shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," he suggested, clearly sensing the tension. "No," Dean said firmly. "Mother needs to understand her position here. Dad may have felt obligated to stay married to you, but that doesn't mean you're entitled to anything that should rightfully go to his son." Cheryl leaned forward slightly, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Opal, surely you understand that Dean has been the one Harold really depended on these last few years. You're comfortable enough with your Social Security and the small savings account. Dean has a family to think about. Real responsibilities, as if caring for a dying husband wasn't a real responsibility. As if 45 years of marriage were just something to be brushed aside." I looked at Mr. Chen, hoping for some voice of reason, some legal perspective that might cut through this nightmare. But he avoided my eyes, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to challenge his client's son. "I think you should leave now," Dean said, his tone final. "We have important matters to discuss, and frankly, your presence here is inappropriate." The dismissal was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment I couldn't move. I stood there, looking at my son, this man I had raised, worried over, loved unconditionally, and saw only a stranger who was taking pleasure and humiliating me. "Dean," I said one more time, my voice barely a whisper. "Please. Goodbye, Mother." I walked out of that dining room on legs that felt like they might collapse at any moment. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices resuming their discussion, the rustle of papers being shuffled. They were dividing up Harold's life without me, erasing my existence from the equation as if I had never mattered at all. But as I reached my car, something crystallized inside me. The fog of grief and shock began to clear, replaced by something sharper, more focused. Harold had always been careful about important things. He'd always protected me, sometimes in ways I didn't even realize. Until later, I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, not starting the engine. Through the dining room window, I could see Dean gesturing as he spoke, Cheryl nodding along, Mr. Chen taking notes. They looked so confident, so certain that they had everything figured out. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The number was still programmed in from years ago, though I hadn't called it in a long time. Harold's personal attorney. Not the family lawyer Dean had chosen, but the man Harold had consulted privately. On several occasions, over the years, Robert Morrison's office came the familiar voice of his secretary. "This is Opal Whitfield," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I need to schedule an appointment with Mr. Morrison as soon as possible. It's about my husband Harold's estate." "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield. Mr. Morrison has been expecting your call." Expecting my call, my heart began to race as the implications settled in. Harold had been planning for this moment all along. Robert Morrison's office felt like a sanctuary after the hostile atmosphere of my own dining room. The elderly attorney greeted me with genuine warmth, his silver hair and kind eyes reminding me of Harold in some ways. As I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, I felt like I could breathe freely for the first time in days. "Opal, I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, his voice carrying decades of professional compassion. "Harold was a good man, and he loved you very much." The simple acknowledgement of Harold's love brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you. I'm afraid I'm quite confused about some things, though." Dean seems to think Mr. Morrison held up a gentle hand. "Before we discuss anything else, I need you to understand something important. Harold came to see me privately several times over the past 2 years. He was very concerned about certain family dynamics." Family dynamics. That was a polite way of putting it. "He knew," I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. "He knew that Dean and Cheryl were working to turn him against you. He knew they were spreading lies, poisoning family relationships for their own gain." Harold was heartbroken about it, but he wasn't fooled. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness wash over me. Harold had seen through their manipulation, but he'd suffered because of it too. "Why didn't he say anything to me?" I whispered. "Because he was protecting you," Mr. Morrison replied. "He knew that if you understood the full extent of their scheming, it would destroy you. He also knew that confronting Dean directly would only make things worse." As he spoke, memories began flooding back with startling clarity. Conversations I'd dismissed, moments I'd explained away, incidents that now made perfect sense. I remembered the day 2 years ago when Dean had insisted Harold needed a new financial advisor, someone younger, more up-to-date with current strategies. He'd said Harold had seemed reluctant, but eventually agreed to meet with the man Dean recommended. What I hadn't known was that Harold had quietly continued seeing Mr. Morrison throughout that entire process. I remembered Cheryl's sudden interest in family genealogy, how she'd encouraged Harold to share stories about his childhood, his parents, his memories of building our life together. At the time, I'd thought it was sweet. Now, I realized she'd been gathering information, looking for ammunition. They were planning this for a long time. I said, more to myself than to Mr. Morrison. Yes, Harold began to piece it together about 18 months ago. Dean's visits became more frequent, but they weren't really about spending time with his father. He was always asking questions about finances, about Harold's health, about your relationship. The pattern was becoming clear now. Dean would visit when I was at my book club or grocery shopping. He'd call Harold with concerns about my spending habits or my controlling behavior. Slowly, methodically, he'd been building a case against me in his father's mind. Except Harold hadn't believed any of it. One thing that particularly upset Harold, Mr. Morrison continued, was when Dean suggested you were suffering from early dementia. He claimed you were becoming forgetful, making poor decisions, that Harold needed to protect himself legally. I gasped. He said that multiple times. Dean was pushing Harold to revise his will, to set up a trust that would essentially cut you out of any significant inheritance. He claimed it was for your own protection, that you couldn't handle financial responsibility. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Dean hadn't just been working to turn Harold against me. He'd been trying to convince Harold that I was mentally incompetent, but Harold saw right through it. Mr. Morrison assured me. In fact, that's when he decided to take action. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents. Harold spent months carefully documenting every conversation, every suggestion Dean made, every lie Cheryl told about your behavior. He wanted to be absolutely certain about their motivations before he made his final decisions. What kind of decisions? I asked, though my heart was already racing with anticipation. Harold created a new will, one that Dean knows nothing about. He also established several financial safeguards to protect you and ensure that Dean's manipulations couldn't succeed even after Harold's death. I stared at the folder, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. Harold knew this would happen. He knew Dean would try to exclude me. He hoped it wouldn't come to that. But yes, he prepared for the possibility. Harold was always a careful man. But in his final months, he became absolutely meticulous about protecting you. As Mr. Morrison opened the folder and began spreading documents across his desk, I thought about those last weeks with Harold, the private phone calls he'd made when he thought I was sleeping, the afternoons when he'd claimed to be resting, but I'd heard the soft click of his laptop keyboard, the way he'd hold my hand and tell me not to worry about anything. Trust me, Opal, he'd said so many times, everything will be all right. He'd been working, even while battling cancer, to ensure my security and dignity. While Dean and Cheryl were scheming to betray me, Harold was quietly outmaneuvering them. There's something else, Mr. Morrison said, his expression growing more serious. Harold left specific instructions about how this information should be revealed. He wanted Dean to show his true character first, without any interference. He said it was important for you to see exactly who your son had become. The wisdom of that strategy was becoming clear. If Harold had confronted Dean while he was alive, Dean could have simply changed tactics, become more subtle in his manipulation. This way, Dean had revealed himself completely, burned every bridge, shown his true nature, without any possibility of pretending otherwise. So what happens now? I asked. Mr. Morrison smiled, and for the first time in weeks, I saw genuine hope in someone's eyes when they looked at me. Now, we give Dean exactly what he's asking for. A family meeting where everything is made clear, where all the truth comes out. He picked up his phone. I think it's time to schedule a proper reading of Harold's will, the real one. As I listened to him making the call, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold's diagnosis. A sense of anticipation rather than dread. Dean thought he'd won, thought he'd successfully erased me from the family narrative. Harold had other plans. The second family meeting was scheduled for the following Friday, exactly 2 weeks after Harold's funeral. This time, the call came from Mr. Morrison's office, not from Dean. I could only imagine the confusion and irritation that call must have caused. Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Morrison has asked me to inform all parties that there are some discrepancies in the estate documentation that need to be addressed immediately. His secretary had explained to Dean over the phone, her voice professionally neutral. I spent the week in a strange state of suspended animation. Part of me was terrified that this was all some mistake, that Harold's protections wouldn't be enough to overcome Dean's manipulations. But another part of me, growing stronger each day, felt an odd sense of peace. Harold had loved me enough to plan for this moment. I wasn't facing this battle alone. On Friday morning, I dressed carefully. In the navy blue suit Harold had always said brought out my eyes. I wanted to look dignified, composed, unbroken by the cruelties of the past weeks. When I arrived at the house, Dean's SUV and Cheryl's BMW were already there, along with Mr. Chen's sedan in a car I didn't recognize. I used my key one more time, knowing it might be the last time I ever entered this house as someone with the right to be there. Dean was pacing in the living room when I walked in, his face flushed with irritation. Cheryl sat rigidly on the sofa, her usual smugness replaced by barely controlled anxiety. Mr. Chen stood by the window, checking his watch repeatedly. What the hell is this about? Dean demanded as soon as he saw me. Some other lawyer claiming there are problems with Dad's will. Did you put him up to this? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Dean strode to answer it, and I heard Mr. Morrison's calm voice introducing himself. He entered the living room carrying a leather briefcase, followed by a younger woman with a court reporter's equipment. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Morrison, and I was Harold Whitfield's personal attorney for the past 15 years. This is Ms. Sarah Chen, a certified court reporter who will be documenting today's proceedings. Mr. Chen looked confused. I don't understand. I'm Harold's attorney. I handled his will preparation 6 months ago. Mr. Morrison's expression remained pleasant but firm. You handled one will preparation. Mr. Chen. Harold maintained separate legal counsel for his most important documents. The room fell silent, except for the soft clicking of Ms. Chen setting up her equipment. Dean's face had gone pale, while Cheryl gripped the arm of the sofa so tightly her knuckles were white. What are you talking about? Dean asked, his voice strained. Mr. Morrison opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick document bound in blue legal backing. I'm talking about Harold's actual last will and testament, executed 3 months before his death, improperly witnessed and notarized. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on each person present. Harold was very specific about how this will should be presented. He wanted to ensure that certain behaviors and attitudes were fully documented before the true terms of his estate were revealed. Dean sank into a chair, the color draining from his face. That's impossible. Dad and I went over everything. He showed me the will. Yes, Harold told me about those conversations. He also told me about your suggestions regarding your mother's mental competency, your recommendations for financial guardianship, and your concerns about her ability to manage an inheritance. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Cheryl shifted uncomfortably, finally speaking up. Harold was obviously confused in his final months. Whatever he told you was probably influenced by medication or illness. Mr. Morrison's smile was cold. Harold was mentally sharp until the day he died, as confirmed by 2 independent medical evaluations. He requested specifically to prevent that kind of challenge to his final wishes. He opened the will and cleared his throat. Harold was quite detailed in his final document. He addresses the attempts to manipulate him, the lies told about his wife, and his disappointment in his son's character. Dean jumped to his feet. You can't be serious. Dad would never disinherit his own son. You're right, Mr. Morrison replied calmly. Harold didn't disinherit you completely. You are mentioned in the will. He flipped to a specific page. To my son Dean, who has shown me, in my final years, what kind of man he truly is. I leave the sum of $10,000. This represents approximately what I estimate he would have inherited if he had treated his mother with even basic human decency. The silence that followed was deafening. Dean's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That can't be legal, Cheryl said, her voice shrill. A son has rights to his father's estate. Actually, in this state, a person has complete discretion over how to distribute their assets, provided they are of sound mind and not under duress. Harold's multiple medical evaluations and the detailed documentation of his reasoning make this will virtually uncontestable. Mr. Morrison continued reading. The remainder of Harold's estate, including this house, all financial accounts, investments, and personal property, goes entirely to his beloved wife, Opal, who stood by him faithfully for 45 years and deserved better than the treatment she received from his son. I felt the room spinning around me. Everything. Harold had left me everything. But Mr. Morrison wasn't finished. Harold also included specific provisions regarding Dean's behavior. Any attempt to contest this will, harass Opal, or interfere with her inheritance will result in the immediate forfeiture of his $10,000 bequest, which will instead be donated to the Cancer Research Foundation, where Harold volunteered. Dean was staring at the floor, his entire body trembling with what I realized was rage, not grief. Cheryl had gone completely white, probably calculating how this would affect their own financial plans. Furthermore, Mr. Morrison continued. Harold established a protective trust to ensure that Opal never has to depend on Dean for anything. He was quite explicit that his son had forfeited any right to make decisions about his mother's welfare. The young court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting every word of this devastating revelation. Everything Dean had assumed, everything he'd planned for, every cruel word he'd spoken, it had all been for nothing. There are also some personal letters Harold left, Mr. Morrison said, producing several sealed envelopes, one for Opal and one for Dean. He handed me my envelope with gentle care, but held Dean's out with obvious reluctance. Dean snatched it from his hand, tearing it open with shaking fingers. As Dean read, his face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, anger, and finally, something that might have been shame. The letter was short, but whatever Harold had written hit its target with precision. He knew, Dean whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. He knew everything. Mr. Morrison packed up his documents with the same methodical care Harold had always shown. The estate will be settled within 30 days. Opal, you'll need to come by my office next week to handle the paperwork. As the lawyers prepared to leave, Dean finally looked at me directly, for the first time since the reading began. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the little boy I'd once loved unconditionally. Mom, he started, but then stopped, as if he'd forgotten how to talk to me, as his mother instead of his victim. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, feeling Harold's protection surrounding me like an invisible shield. Goodbye, Dean, I said quietly. I hope someday you remember who you used to be. Harold had given me more than just financial security. He'd given me the dignity of walking away on my own terms. That evening, I sat alone in Harold's study, the letter from him still unopened on the desk. The house felt different now, not like a place I was being pushed out of, but like the home Harold and I had built together over 4 decades. Dean and Cheryl had left immediately after the will reading, their faces masks of shock and fury. Mr. Chen had mumbled apologies about the confusion before hurrying out behind them. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt full of Harold's presence, his love, his careful planning that had protected me, even from beyond the grave. With trembling fingers, I opened his letter, my dearest Opal. It began in his familiar handwriting, slightly shakier than it used to be, but still unmistakably his. If you're reading this, then the worst has happened. Not my death, which we both knew was coming, but Dean's betrayal, which I hoped against hope might not come to pass. I had to stop reading for a moment, tears blurring the words. Harold had hoped Dean would prove him wrong, would show some decency when faced with his father's death. But he'd prepared for the alternative. I want you to know that I saw everything. Every lie Cheryl whispered in Dean's ear. Every suggestion that you were somehow failing me. Every attempt to turn my final months into a weapon against you. It broke my heart, but it also opened my eyes to who our son has become. The letter detailed things I hadn't even known about. Phone calls where Dean had suggested I was taking advantage of Harold's illness. Conversations where Cheryl had hinted that I was only staying married for financial security. Meetings where they'd presented Harold with evidence of my supposed mental decline. Things like forgetting to water plants or misplacing my reading glasses. They underestimated me. Harold had written, they thought a dying man wouldn't notice their manipulation, wouldn't have the strength to fight back. They were wrong on both counts. He documented everything, recorded phone conversations where Dean discussed managing Mom after Dad's gone, screenshots of text messages between Dean and Cheryl, planning their strategy, even photographs of financial documents Dean had tried to access without permission. I need you to understand something. Opal, this isn't about money, though I know the inheritance will give you security and independence. This is about respect. This is about ensuring that the woman who loved me faithfully for 45 years isn't destroyed by the greed and cruelty of people who should have protected her. The next part of the letter made me gasp out loud. Dean doesn't know that I was aware of his plans for the funeral. Cheryl sent him text messages about keeping you away from the church so you couldn't make a scene. They discussed how to present themselves as the grieving family while painting you as unstable. I have copies of all of it. So Harold had known, even as he lay dying, that Dean would try to exclude me from saying goodbye. The knowledge that he'd been aware of their cruelty, that he'd faced his final days, knowing what was planned, filled me with a rage so pure It surprised me. But the letter continued with something that cooled my anger and replaced it with deep sadness. What hurts most isn't their greed, it's their willingness to destroy you to get what they want. Dean was a good boy once. You were a wonderful mother to him. But somewhere along the way, he chose to become someone I don't recognize. Cheryl saw his weaknesses and exploited them. But the choices were still his to make. Harold had included photocopies of text messages that painted Cheryl in an even worse light than I'd imagined. She'd systematically worked to isolate Dean from us, feeding his resentments and encouraging his worst impulses. Messages where she called me that old woman and discussed how to handle the inheritance situation once Harold died. But there were also messages from Dean that chilled me to the bone. Messages where he called his dying father dramatic and complained about having to visit so often. Messages where he calculated inheritance values and discussed whether Harold was taking too long to die. I set the letter down, feeling sick. This was my son, the baby I'd nurse through fevers and nightmares, the little boy who'd once made me Mother's Day cards with crooked hearts drawn in crayon. The final page of Harold's letter was the hardest to read. I know you're wondering if you failed as a mother, if there was something you could have done differently. The answer is no. Dean made his choices as an adult. You gave him love, guidance, and every opportunity to be a good man. What he chose to do with those gifts is on him, not you. I'm leaving you everything, not just because you deserve it, but because I trust you to use it wisely. Live the life you want. Opal, travel to those places we always talked about visiting. Buy books without checking the price. Take art classes. Be generous to people who show you genuine kindness. You've earned every comfort, every joy, every peaceful moment that's coming to you. And if Dean ever comes to his senses, if he ever remembers who he used to be and tries to make amends, the decision about forgiveness will be yours alone. Don't let anyone pressure you either way. You owe him nothing now. The letter ended with the words Harold had said to me thousands of times over our marriage. I love you more than words can say. Always and forever, your devoted husband, Harold. I sat in that quiet study for a long time, holding the letter against my chest. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening routines. Families having dinner, children being called in from play, couples walking dogs in the fading light. Normal life, continuing while my world had been completely transformed. My phone buzzed with a text message. Dean's number. We need to talk. There has to be a way to work this out. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Harold had been right. Dean still thought this was something that could be negotiated, manipulated, managed. He still didn't understand that his father had seen straight through him. Another message came through, this one longer. Mom, I know things got heated today. Maybe we both said things we didn't mean. Dad was obviously influenced by his illness. We can contest this, but it would be better if we worked together as a family. As a family, after everything he'd done, everything he'd said, he still thought he could use that word to control me. I turned off my phone and walked through the house that was now truly mine. In each room, I could feel Harold's love surrounding me, protecting me, ensuring that the final chapter of my life would be written on my own terms. Tomorrow, Dean would probably try calling, maybe even show up at the door. But tonight, I was finally free to grieve my husband properly, to remember our love without the shadow of betrayal hanging over everything. Harold had given me more than an inheritance. He'd given me the truth, and with it, the power to choose my own future. 3 months later, I stood in the empty living room of what had been our family home for 32 years, watching the moving truck pull away. The house had sold quickly. Apparently, Harold's excellent maintenance and my careful decorating had created something quite desirable. The new owners were a young couple with twin toddlers who'd fallen in love with the garden and the big kitchen where Harold and I had shared so many meals. It felt right, somehow, that the house would be filled with young voices again, with the chaos and joy of a growing family. Harold would have liked that. Dean had tried to contact me 17 times in those 3 months. Phone calls, text messages, even a letter delivered by his lawyer threatening to contest the will, despite Mr. Morrison's warnings about the consequences. Each attempt had become more desperate, more angry as the reality of his situation set in. The $10,000 Harold had left him was gone now, forfeited, when Dean's lawyer filed the contest paperwork. True to Harold's wishes, that money had gone to the Cancer Research Foundation, where Harold had volunteered. They'd even sent me a lovely note about establishing a small memorial fund in his name. I hadn't responded to any of Dean's communications. What was there to say? Harold's letter had made everything crystal clear. Dean's own words and actions had revealed who he'd chosen to become. The son I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't trust. My new apartment was in a senior living community called Sunset Gardens, about 40 minutes away from the old neighborhood. Not one of those depressing places where people go to wait for death, but a vibrant community with art studios, gardening clubs, and a book discussion group that met every Tuesday. I had selected the most spacious one-bedroom unit available, featuring a quaint balcony that offered a view of the community garden. The walls were adorned in a comforting butter yellow, evoking memories of the kitchen from our first apartment. I filled the space with cherished pieces, leaving behind what no longer served me. Harold's photograph rested on the mantelpiece, not in somber tones, but amidst the cherished mementos we had gathered throughout the years. A cherished shell from our honeymoon beach, a delicate pressed flower from our 10th anniversary picnic, and the small wooden bird he lovingly carved during his retirement. On this particular morning, I found myself getting ready for an experience I had never envisioned myself having the bravery to undertake. The brochure rested, its pages unfurled, on my kitchen table, a captivating voyage along the waterways of Europe, where every bend reveals a story and every view enchants the soul. 15 days of navigating the waterways from Amsterdam to Budapest, with delightful pauses in Germany, Austria, and Hungary along the way. Harold and I had dreamed of embarking on that very journey for years, yet something always seemed to stand in our way. First came Dean's college expenses, followed by his wedding, then the house renovations, and finally, Harold's illness. We kept promising ourselves that we would do it next year, until the opportunity slipped away and there was no next year remaining. But I was heading out now, on my own. Yes, but never truly alone. I held on to Harold's love, along with his clear guidance, to pursue the life I truly desired. The phone rang just as I was going over the packing list. I nearly brushed it off, yet the caller ID displayed a number that was unfamiliar to me. Madam Whitfield, this is Sarah Chen, reaching out from this community newsletter. We're highlighting new residents, and I thought you might be interested in being part of it. I paused, uncertainty creeping in. I had been staying under the radar since my arrival, not quite prepared to share my past or face inquiries about my family. What would that entail? I inquired. Could you share a brief overview of your background, your passions? What led you to Sunset Gardens? We enjoy facilitating connections among individuals who have common interests or experiences. There was an inviting sincerity in her voice that felt comforting and real. And in that moment, it hit me that I was tired of running from my own reality. Absolutely, I responded. I would be grateful for that. The interview was scheduled for the following afternoon. As I prepared for it, I pondered on the aspects of myself that I wanted to reveal. For many years, I had defined myself through my relationships as Harold's wife and Dean's mother. At the age of 73, I found myself finally free to uncover the genuine spirit of Opal Whitfield. When Sarah arrived, I was pleasantly surprised to see that she looked even younger than I had expected, probably in her 40s. With kind eyes and a soft smile, we found ourselves on my balcony, savoring tea and relishing the cookies I had perfected during my hours spent immersed in cooking shows. A quiet pleasure I had long neglected in the midst of those chaotic times. What brought you to Sunset Gardens? She asked, her notepad ready for jotting down thoughts. I contemplated the question with deep reflection. Recently, I found myself journeying through life as a widow. I shared, after 45 years of marriage, I found myself at a pivotal moment, recognizing that it was time to step into a new chapter of my life. A space where I could cultivate fresh relationships and revive interests I had overlooked for far too long. That must have been a difficult decision to confront. Is your family nearby? The question I had dreaded above all others. As I looked at this empathetic young woman, I was overwhelmed by a deep desire to reveal the truth. My relationship with my son has become more strained as the years have passed. Sometimes families can grow distant from each other, especially after experiencing a deep and significant loss. I've come to understand that the concept of family can reach far beyond mere biological connections. It focuses on individuals who truly value your well-being and joy. Sarah nodded, her expression revealing a profound understanding that suggested she bore the weight of her own complex family story. What brings you the greatest joy as you embark on this new journey in your life? After what seemed like an endless stretch of time, a genuine smile finally graced my lips. Adventure. Next month, I'm setting off on a river cruise through Europe, a dream my husband and I have cherished for so long, yet have never had the chance to realize. I've signed up for watercolor classes here. In my younger days, I explored the world of painting, but as the years went by, the demands of life began to overshadow that passion. That sounds absolutely wonderful. What wisdom can you offer to those who might be experiencing comparable transformations in their lives? I pondered over Harold's letter, his words compelling me to seize the life I yearned for, the challenges of the past few months, and yet the unexpected freedom that had emerged from it all. Embrace the chance for a new start. I finally encouraged, do not let the views or demands of others obstruct your path to what truly makes you happy. Frequently, the most touching instances of our path reveal themselves precisely when we think the story is drawing to a close. After Sarah left, I stood on the balcony watching the sun sink beneath the horizon, its warm light enveloping the garden in a gentle embrace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the residents gathered in the courtyard, their cheerful laughter drifting up to my second-floor apartment. Tomorrow night, I would join them. I promised myself the time had come to confront the truths of life head-on. My phone buzzed softly, indicating yet another message from Dean. I glanced at it briefly, yet another sincere attempt to close the divides and restore the bonds within the family. I dismissed it without completely grasping the significance and permanently cut off his number. Some may argue that I was being too harsh, maybe even inflexible, but the insights I had gained over the past few months were profound. Forgiveness does not mean permitting continued pain. Genuine love should never be confused with tolerating harm, and familial ties do not give anyone the right to disturb your peace. I received the travel confirmation for my cruise, a blend of excitement and nervousness bubbling up inside me. In merely 3 weeks, I would be standing on the deck of a riverboat, watching the charming European countryside glide by, enjoying meals prepared by someone else, and relaxing in a bed made by another's care. For the first time in my adult life, I realized I was entirely responsible for my own decisions. Harold had protected me in death, just as he had throughout our shared moments, ensuring that my final years were filled with dignity, security, and the autonomy to make my own choices. Dean had revealed his authentic self, and while that understanding hurt, it also freed me from the obligation of trying to fix a bond that was irreparable. As the night wrapped around the sunset gardens and the stars started to shimmer, I raised my evening tea in a gentle homage to Harold's memory and to the unexpected gift of fresh starts at 73. Tomorrow, I will begin collecting my belongings for the adventure to Europe. Next week, I will embark on my watercolor classes, and from this moment forward, I will awaken each day with the understanding that my life is genuinely mine to shape. It struck me that this was exactly what Harold would have envisioned for my future. The ending was, in reality, a fresh beginning. I'm genuinely curious about those of you who have chosen to listen to my journey. If you were in my shoes, what would your reaction be? Have you ever gone through something like this? We'd love to hear your insights in the comments below. For now, I'm excited to share 2 additional tales on the last screen that have captivated audiences, and they are bound to surprise you. We truly appreciate your continued presence with us.